so much, Roger. И следующим мы предоставляем слово Майклу Рибейро из юридической фирмы Макфарлейнс, которая базируется в Лондоне. Майкл руководит отделом цифровых технологий и инноваций. И он возвратит нас к теме, которая была упомянута в самом-самом начале. Как реализовать принцип равенства и недискриминации при работе с технологиями, с искусственным интеллектом, в том числе в машинном обучении.
So, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here to speak to you today. When I was 14, I had the great honor of learning Russian for 1 year. And my teacher said to me when I said that I wanted to give it up for French, he said, "One day you will regret that decision." That day has arrived, okay? So, the only thing I can remember is "Где мой ключ, а вот он." That's it. Okay. So I want to talk to you about equality and non-discrimination. We've heard a lot about bias in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And that's the subject that I am going to address this afternoon. I'm going to address it from a slightly different angle, though, which is in relation to the commercial world. Because we heard this morning that human rights can be impacted by state actors and state players and the criminal justice system, or the lack of a criminal justice system. But also, human rights can be impacted by commercial entities. I hope that none of you have your human rights impacted by the criminal justice system. I hope that never happens to any of you here. But it is far more likely that your human rights, the rights not to be discriminated against on any ground, will be impacted by the commercial world. Because it is in the commercial world that AI, new digital technologies, are being used, and they are being used at pace. We've talked about whether we will ever have online decisions, online court decisions. The largest online disputes platform in the world, which deals with over 60 million cases a year, is eBay. Okay? That is not going to affect most criminals, but it might affect you. And the answers that come from that platform might affect you. So this is a quote from the Toronto Declaration, which was a number of human rights organizations that came together in Toronto in 2018. And they talked about setting out a charter of safeguards to which governments and organizations can adhere when using or developing AI to protect rights and equalities and non-discrimination in machine learning systems. And what they say is from policing to welfare systems, online disclosures, and healthcare, to name a few examples, systems employing machine learning technologies can vastly and rapidly change or reinforce power structures or inequalities on an unprecedented scale and with significant harm to human rights. Now, that has not been the first declaration around that. And the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers were probably, in my view, one of the first organizations, private sector organization, to deal with AI and some of the issues around AI and human rights. And they have done a lot of work on this, and if you have time, go and look on their website. There are hundreds of pages of materials which are far better than some of the legal stuff that I have seen, dealing with human rights and ethics. But what they say is the four pillars really are human rights, ensuring that AI does not infringe internationally recognized human rights, well-being, prioritizing the metrics of human well-being in AI design and use, accountability, ensuring designers and operators of AI systems are responsible and accountable, and awareness of misuse, minimizing the risks of AI being misused. Now, there are other organizations which have set up similar charters or different work. So there's the Partnership on AI, which was formed by many of the major technology companies in Silicon Valley, and they have brought together a number of non-for-profit partners into that grouping as well. And I think they have 6 pillars of work that they're working on, which is to look at how artificial intelligence may impact everybody's daily lives. We've heard earlier on about the Charter, but this is also the EU Commission proposals. This is their high-level expert working group. And they talk about 7 issues when it comes to AI. The overriding principles around AI is that any AI that is developed by government or business must be legal and lawful, it must be ethical, and it must be robust. Okay, legal and lawful, it must comply with laws. Ethical, it must comply with ethical principles. And robust, it must be secure from penetration and from attack. Underneath those 3 principles are 7 sub-principles. Human agency and oversight. AI systems should support human decision-making. They shouldn't replace decision-making. So there's this concept here of an AI being assisted intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. Robustness and safety. Built into any AI system, there must be a preventative approach to risk. Privacy and data governance. There must be proper security elements built into AI. There must be privacy by design built into an AI application. Transparency. Transparency not only as to the decision-making process, transparency not only as to who is making those decisions, transparency as to whether or not you are talking to AI or a human being, but also transparency to where the data comes from that trains that AI. And that's going to be the bulk of what I want to talk about, that data, in a minute. Diversity and non-discrimination and fairness. Identifiable discrimination and bias should not be in data sets used to train AI. Society and environmental well-being. AI must also align with the EU Commission's environmental goals, must align with mental health issues, must align with helping to protect the vulnerable. And accountability. If AI goes wrong, who is responsible? We talked about that a bit earlier on, and it's not an easy answer. So what is the problem with AI? Where does AI get its bias from? Is it actually within the application itself and the design of the application? It could be. But AI is unique as a technology in that it is capable of learning, making independent decisions, and deciding the criteria upon which those decisions are made. And it goes through that learning process and that training process by, first of all, being exposed to historic data sets. Because without data, AI is an empty box. It doesn't do anything without data. It's like a brain that has no knowledge. Okay? It can only work if it has data. So companies get historic data sets and use that to train artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence also learns by exposure to live data inputs in live operations. So you've got the historic and you've got the live operations. Now the problem with AI is that if those data sets are biased in any way or discriminatory, then don't expect the AI to be anything other than that. Anybody recognize this nice man? Would you take him home to your mother? This is Norman Bates from the film Psycho. It's also the name of an artificial intelligence developed by MIT, which they were very proud to announce that they had invented the first AI psychopath in the world. Now, there were 2 instances of this AI application. One instance, and the AI application was to look at images and then to put captions against the images. That was the purpose of the AI application. So it was a caption imaging application. One side of the application was exposed to nice things, flowers, birds, little furry animals. The other instance of the application was exposed to some of the darkest material they could find on the internet on a site called Reddit. So lots of violence was there. They then showed the application, the two different applications, same programming, same code, same application, just trained on different data. They showed it ink blots. The ink blot application was there, you can see it. And this is ink blot number 8. The application that was trained on seeing lovely little bunny rabbits and furry cats saw a person holding an umbrella in the air. The application exposed to the violent imagery saw a man is shot dead in front of his screaming wife. It's all about the data. What you feed into an application will result in its ability to do something. Okay? So, how does AI become biased? There are many ways. I just want to talk about 4. Bias because the historic data that's being used to train the AI is actually bias in itself. There may be inherent bias also in existing processes. So if you were developing an AI application to replace an institutionally biased application process, then don't be surprised if the AI replicates that process bias. There might be bias in the development teams developing, and there might be bias in live interactions. I'll give you some examples of this. So this was a first online beauty competition which was going to be judged by AI. I didn't enter this, and if I had entered this, I would have been prejudiced against. Because what they discovered is that by and large, the AI only found white people attractive. People of my colored skin, not so much. And the reason for that is if you have not that many people of color within the data set, then you might actually have biased results, said the chief technical officer. And that's what they'd had. When you're training an algorithm to recognize certain patterns, you might not have enough data, or the data might not be biased. So we've got an example there of bias within the design team, bias within the data set, and bias probably in the process that it's trying to replicate, all caught in one. And that results in a biased application. We've heard a lot about chatbots. This is Tay. Tay was Microsoft's first venture into chatbot, or one of the first ventures. And they gave Tay this lovely persona of a teenage girl. And she was trained by talking about Walt Disney movies and the Walt Disney Channel and pop songs, etc., etc. And they wanted to try Tay on various different channels that teenagers would engage with and talk to those teenagers at that time and to test the boundaries of the chatbot. They had to unplug Tay within 24 hours. Anybody know why? Because within 24 hours, Tay had turned into a Nazi-loving apologist who was denying the Holocaust. Now, how did that happen? That wasn't in any Walt Disney movie. It happened because activists targeted Tay and started to interact with her using language and using concepts around that. And she learnt from that and then started posting some very horrible things. So the plug had to be pulled. So here is an example of live interactions targeting a chatbot, which is causing the chatbot to act in a way which nobody predicted. Then we have inherent bias again in data processes. So MIT in February 2018 found that 3 of the latest gender recognition AIs, and these are from big companies, IBM, Microsoft, and Myville, could correctly identify a person's gender from a photograph with 99% accuracy if that person was a white man. If it was a dark-skinned woman, the accuracy of gender recognition dropped to 35%. Okay? So these are big companies who are getting it wrong. Just read last week, there's a health data issue here with a chatbot called Babylon, which the NHS the health system in the UK is exploring and using and testing. And a consultant posted this, said that he had tried to use this chat bot called Babylon, and it fed Babylon some symptoms. And the symptoms were to do with chest pains and nausea. And he did it twice. The only thing he changed was the gender of the patient. So the first time, the man who was experiencing these symptoms was deemed to be suffering possibly a cardiological system and possibly a heart attack. When he changed the gender to woman with exactly the same symptoms, it was depression or a panic attack. Okay? So here we have an example of gender bias in a health system. Now, that's quite serious if that's being used to provide health care to you or to me and they get it wrong. And that gender bias happens because the technology industry is not representative. So according to the World Economic Forum and their gap report on global gender in 2018, just 22% of AI and 12% of machine learning professionals worldwide are women. So 8 out of 10 men and 9 out of 10 men, respectively, are programming AI and machine learning. The AI Now Institute found that just 2.5% of Google's worldwide workforce is black, while Microsoft and Facebook are around about 4%. So if you don't have true diversity in your workforce, in your design teams, in your data scientists, in your programmers, don't be surprised if you're producing algorithms which are biased in themselves. So how can you engender trust in AI? AI, if you are a consumer and you want to be sure that you can trust AI, you have to be sure that it has open and consistent decision making. That means you need to be sure there's a clear policy framework for that decision making, that you can understand how that decision making is made. But we heard earlier with black box technology, some companies don't want to release that, or some companies don't know how the decision is being made because the AI is so sophisticated. You need to ensure that there is accountability. And accountability means that there's got to be a clear legal framework for the use of AI, a clear framework of who is liable if things go wrong. I don't think you can rely on the principle of force majeure, as we heard earlier. And we talked about, possibly this morning, about a registration system. So we know who actually is producing AI, not just AI, I would venture to argue, but also the data sets which AI is building upon. And your AI has to meet minimum ethical standards. So we know in the European Union we have a concept of privacy by design, which was introduced by the GDPR. We now need to have a concept in the building of AI of ethics by design. Now that sounds great, but part of the problem is that there really isn't a universal ethical framework that we can adopt. Because what is ethical in one country may not be ethical in another. What is ethical in one part of a country or a community within a country may not be ethical to another community within that country. Let me give you an example. I'm going to draw the example from privacy. In the United Kingdom and in Europe, privacy is seen as a human right, and our data protection legislation is built around that whole concept of it being a human right. If you look at privacy in the United States, privacy is really seen through the lens of it being a consumer right. It's to do with what you buy and sell and your consumer protection rights. Not a human right, but a consumer right, which is different. In other parts of the world, privacy is seen as a governmental right. So when I first became a partner back in 2000, I gave a talk on privacy and the latest European privacy laws to an audience of Saudi men in Bahrain. And I was talking about all these great rights people were getting, and they were getting more and more angry And I thought, what have I done something culturally to upset them? And one of them just said, I've had enough. I don't see why it is not in the interests of government to have as much information on citizens as possible. And they all applauded him. So there are cultural nuances to what we regard as minimum ethical standards. So what can we do? If you're developing AI, and we have the entrepreneur over here on the left who is going to do the criminal justice chatbot for us, how do you ensure that you are meeting some kind of measure of removing bias from the system? Looking at the source of historic data, looking at the quantity of data. Are the data sets large enough to really give you sufficient sources to remove bias? Have you gone through a process of removing bias from historic data sets? What steps have you built into the algorithm to ensure that it is prevented from learning bias, in that Tay example? And that takes you to the bias attacks. How do you ensure that you've got a robust system which won't be open to activists trying to attack your AI? What steps have you taken to ensure that the processes that you're actually replicating are not institutionally biased? I'll give you an example of that which ties up with the diversity issue. Amazon had spent millions of dollars on an AI system to review CVs, curriculum vitae, that were sent to their engineering department. And I think this project had gone on for years, and they actually had to bin the project. They had to stop the project because the AI was only selecting white men as engineers. Now, why was it doing that? Well, they trained it on Amazon's past historic data. Amazon's past historic paper data said that these are the kind of people we select as great engineers. And surprise, surprise, they were all white men. It was an institutionalized, biased process. The data was biased. Surprise, surprise, the AI is biased. Decision making. This is about engendering trust. To what extent is the AI a decision maker or decision enabler? We've heard a lot about AI and the use in the criminal justice and civil justice systems. I don't think AI will ever replace a judge. I think an AI application could help judges make better decisions by allowing them access to much wider data sets of information. I think it will help lawyers to provide better advice by allowing them access to much better information. So by way of an example, if somebody asks me about the success or otherwise of a case, I can make that decision based on my small data set, which is here, on the case law that I have read, on the legislation I have read, on my knowledge of that particular judge. But I don't have all of the data and all of the information. What about human involvement? Are humans in the loop in the decision-making process? Because if you know the AI is there to assist, but a human will ultimately make the decision, that will engender trust. Is there an ethical framework in the design of the AI? Is there a clear policy framework for people to see? Is the understanding there of why decisions are made? Is it clear and transparent and consistent and understandable? Legislation. Does your country have a clear legislative framework under which AI is used? And accountability. Who is liable when AI goes wrong? Is it clear? In the civil and the commercial world, is insurance available? And that might be an avenue for autonomous vehicles that we heard later on. So, just to end with, look, AI, as I've said, we've talked a lot about it. In the commercial world, I think it has the ability to impact on every one of us, far more than in the criminal justice world at the moment. And that means that we have to be ensuring, as lawyers, as engineers, as scientists, that we're pushing for those ethical design elements in the commercial world as much as we are in the civil and criminal justice world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. И ваши вопросы.
I'm going to come here for the question.
Yeah, you can sit here. Nikolai.
Thank you so much. I'm a little bit confused, so give me 1 second to put it in words. It was a brilliant explanation of elements of integration of the artificial intelligence into our legal systems. But I missed one element which is basic to all legal systems here in Russia or everywhere in the world. Interests of states, interests of people, and interests of business, etc. Just to give you an example of what confused me. There was discussed a lot today the use of artificial intelligence for crime prediction. And with about 80% probability, it's not safe to use this technology for prediction and prevention of crime. But as for me, maybe I am not correct, if we use the same technology of artificial intelligence for granting welfares, for giving social support for some people, it will be okay with even less probability. So it's about interests. In which in whose interest do we use artificial intelligence? Thank you.
Okay, I think that's a very, very important point. And I was reading only today, in Scotland, the police force have just announced that they are going to be using drone technology with facial recognition technology. The purpose of that in Scotland, though, is to look for missing people, and mainly young vulnerable children and vulnerable adults, and try and detect them. And this technology is able to detect someone through facial recognition by from 150 meters. Now, on one side, that is great, the interest of the state protecting the vulnerable. On the other side, people are arguing, well, that is great, but that technology has a dual use and could easily be used to detect criminals or to monitor suspects or to monitor those people who are opposed to the views of the state. Now, the same technology, I know, or very similar technology, is being used in Africa to protect elephants and other wild animals from poachers. And it's been used to great help with the African wildlife authorities to look where the elephants are and to see where the poachers are and to intervene quickly. So you have a technology there which could be used in 3 different ways and probably lots more. But it's in whose interest is it being used? And that is why I think you need to have a clear regulatory and legal framework as to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of use of technology.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for a very interesting presentation. Let me play the devil's advocate for a while.
Please do.
You haven't defined bias. Do you believe that any disproportion means bias?
Well, that's interesting because it goes back to my whole point as to what is ethical in one country is not ethical in another. Okay, so I can define bias from my UK perspective as to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But from the perspective of Russia, that might be different. From this perspective of Saudi Arabia, that might be different. From China, it might be different. From the United States, it might be different. So there are nuances on what is bias, okay? So I think we can come to an agreement in this room that it is wrong to discriminate against a person on grounds of gender. We would all agree with that. We would also agree that it is wrong to discriminate against a person on grounds of colour of skin or race. We'd all agree with that. If I was sitting in the deep south of America, in an evangelical church, and I said it is wrong to discriminate against a person on grounds of sexual preference, they might not agree with me. Yeah? And that's a Western democracy. So there are different views as to what bias is. And I don't think you're ever going to get, other than within European Union framework, an internationally recognized view of what bias constitutes. Yeah. If we did, then we wouldn't have half the problems.
Sorry. What about the second part of the question? Does any disproportion necessarily mean bias?
That is a question for the data scientists, not for me. Just because I don't know the answer to that. There will always be disproportions in data. But the question then is, for the data scientists, whether that is statistically significant or not. And if it is statistically significant, then I think that does represent bias.
Спасибо большое за интересную информацию. И я опять же вот по поводу предвзятости. А как быть, например, с естественно-биологическими особенностями мужчин и женщин, лиц разного возраста, там малолетний, несовершеннолетний, молодой человек, взрослый? Вот как с этим быть? Можно решать, надо ли учитывать? Как это можно учитывать? Можно ли рассматривать это как предвзятость? Спасибо.
I think the answer could be yes, it could be bias, and no, it couldn't be, depending on the nature of the application or the AI. But that is a question for wider society, and AI can only ever replicate what the wider ethical use of bias is within a society. So within the United Kingdom, we have fairly strict laws against, let's take it in the employment context. I'm not an employee lawyer, but in the employment context, that you can't discriminate against someone on the grounds of gender. And 20 years ago, that was it, and race. Recently, I say recently, in the last 15 years, we've now introduced age discrimination into that legislation. But age discrimination 30 years ago was not a ground of bias, but it is now. So, you know, one of the problems is that we live, I use this kind of little catchphrase, we're living in a digital world governed by analog law. And that means that the law can't keep up with what's going on digitally, but sometimes digital doesn't keep up with the cultural changes and the nuances of society as well. And I think that's part of the issue. Does that answer your question?
Спасибо.
Майкл, у меня сейчас возник такой инсайт. Я, наконец, окончательно отчетливо обосновал для себя, почему мы проводим эту конференцию в педагогическом университете. Кто-то спрашивал с утра, и я предлагал разные красивые объяснения. Сейчас до меня дошло, инсайт случился. Ваше описание проблем внедрения искусственного интеллекта в практику и все предлагаемые меры, этические рамки, подходы, приемы удивительно напомнили мне обычную педагогику. Я вдруг подумал, что искусственный интеллект сегодня, он просто маленький. Он ребенок, потому что все, что было на этих слайдах, лучше всего знают хорошие педагоги начального образования. Они этим занимаются каждый день. И что очень важно, самые продвинутые из них, в России это называется педагогика развития, например, они вовремя прочитали классика Льва Выгодского и знают, что не надо торопиться, что не надо ставить супернедостижимые цели, а нужно создавать вокруг ребенка зону ближайшего развития. Ставить маленькие цели, делать шажок, делать следующий шажок. Вот у меня сейчас возникла полная аналогия с обучением, с машинным обучением. Им просто еще многому надо научиться. Начиная с очень простых вещей. Проблема, мне кажется, в том, что мы пока не справились с обучением тем же вещам людей. То есть все эти этические рамки не работают с естественным интеллектом пока что, или плохо работают. Поэтому у меня возник действительно вопрос к разработчикам. Ну, я подозреваю, что привлекают, но интересно было бы узнать, привлекают ли разработчики как информационное обеспечение, как программ, так и разработчики стандартов разного рода, привлекают ли они к своей работе самых продвинутых педагогов, вот особенно педагогов, которые работают с детьми там, от 3 до 10-12 лет, когда все вот то же самое надо помочь, осознать, сформировать, поставить рамки. Спасибо. Если больше вопросов нет, есть.
Владимир Прожеленский, университет Кутафина, МГУА. Ну вот как раз и в какое-то продолжение к инсайду. Да, судьи всегда пытались воспитывать, заботились об их нравственном облике, но и другое средство в традиционном судопроизводстве – разделение ролей. Судья, обвинение и защита. Может быть 3 искусственных интеллекта или несколько искусственных интеллектов, один из которых будет белый мужчина, второй не белый мужчина, а третий женщина. Или на самом деле вот такие функции: нападение, разрушение, обвинение. Или это всегда будет один и тот же искусственный интеллект? Спасибо.
I don't think we are. Okay. Yeah. I think AI is there as an enabler to enable humans to make better decisions. In order to help humans make better decisions which are devoid of bias, then AI needs to be devoid of bias as well. That's my starting point. And the problem we have with the criminal justice system in every country is that there is institutional bias within the system. And that might work in favor of one part of community sometimes or against another part of community in other times. Now, a lot of people are looking at AI as the potential to remove that bias. But that only happens if the actual development of the AI and the data sets that AI is used to train are also devoid of a bias, an institutionalized bias. It doesn't work otherwise. And I think we are a long, long, long way away from that happening at the moment. Just from what I see in it's the practical use of AI and the simple mistakes that we're having, where we have, only 2 out of 10 women developing AI and only 1 out of 10 women developing machine learning technologies globally. There is going to be a gender bias. It's natural. There is. In the same way that if you had a completely male judiciary, there would be a gender bias. If you had a completely female judiciary, there would be a gender bias. A completely black judiciary, there would be a diversity bias. So within AI, you need to address that both from a design and engineering perspective, but also from a data perspective.
I would like to thank you very much for the brilliant presentation. And one of the things I've appreciated mostly is that you introduced the issue of accountability. And you said also that the EU high-level expert group said that there should be always accountability either of the designers or the operators. Now, one of the difficult questions is how do you ensure accountability when there are opaque or self-learning types of AI, such as machine learning? What is your answer to that? How do you do in these difficult cases?
Well, I think it is very difficult. I talk about an accountability supply chain. Okay. The one thing I will start off by saying is that the one thing that will never be accountable is the AI, because the AI does not have legal personality. Okay? It does not have legal personality. So if you look at the instances where technology has been used to cause harm, either deliberately or accidentally, who is responsible for that is always a matter of fact in relation to the case. So you have lots of incidences of autopilot litigation in the United States where a plane has crashed because an autopilot hasn't worked. Okay? Now, I don't know them on a case-by-case basis, but there isn't a one answer to it's always the manufacturer, it's always the airline. Okay? You don't know who it's going to be. But if you think about all of the players involved in AI, is it the designer of the AI? Is it the person that commissions the AI? Is it the person that provides the data set? Is it the person that provides the security network for the artificial intelligence? Is it the hacktivist who targets the AI? Is it the consumer who uses the AI but gives it the wrong information? These are all questions of fact, and there isn't an answer. Now, in certain instances, like autonomous vehicles, government comes in and the world comes in and says, we'll work this through a system of insurance. And the insurance companies think, actually, this is a good opportunity. I actually think what will happen is in the commercial world, in the same way that the insurance industry has developed cyber insurance, which used to be dealt with under the kind of the normal public liability insurance, but they carved that out and said, let's develop cyber security because it's another way of us making money, okay? They will start to develop artificial intelligence insurance as a carve out from a company's general insurance policies. So they will have to then buy that insurance. I think we're a bit away from that yet because the insurance world is certainly looking at it, but they're trying to assess the risks.
Yeah.
У меня вопрос больше связан, наверное, с каким-то долгим-долгим путем, которым нам еще предстоит пройти. Мы все время говорим о создании искусственного интеллекта. Мы не говорим о создании совершенного интеллекта. Говоря об искусственном интеллекте, что это значит? Мы хотим повторить как человеческую руку, ногу, так и человеческий интеллект, который несовершенен. Соответственно, чтобы принимать решения вместо человека или следуя логике человеческой, он должен обладать всеми человеческими пороками, либо иметь о них представление. Поэтому полностью лишая его понятия предвзятости на этапе дизайна, не создаем ли мы проблему в том, чтобы он вообще не смог понять, что это такое, когда понадобится принять такое решение? Является ли то или это поведение предвзятым отношением или нет? Ну и если говорить о совсем долгом пути, то мне представляется, если говорить о передаче таких ценностных вещей, как отправление правосудия в руки искусственного интеллекта, то без разговора о передаче также свободы воли этому устройству мы не сможем полностью передать ей эту категорию, это чисто человеческое понятие. Что вы думаете о таком долгом пути и вообще о том, можно ли мыслить в этом направлении, с точки зрения развития технологий, либо же это скорее из области научной фантастики?
Okay. I think there's a number of questions there. The first issue about bias, I think you can design artificial intelligence at the design stage to recognize what bias is and what bias isn't. Okay? So you can build in parameters into the architecture of an algorithm which says that it is wrong to discriminate against people of color in the decision making. It is wrong to engage in Nazi apologism, which Taiwan, those architectures weren't there. I think when you talk about AI replicating or becoming the perfect intelligence, like a human intelligence, I wish we had never called AI, artificial intelligence. I wish we had called it assisted intelligence. Because where we are at the moment in the state of the technology, we are light years away from a technology which can do that, replicate humanity's mind thinking. But what I think we are in a position of is that we can have very powerful AI, especially with new computing coming along, which can assist us in making better decisions. And that is where I think a lot of the worry around the world is when we use that word artificial intelligence. It's almost equating it at the same level of humanity, of womankind and mankind. And that is wrong, because it's not. It is it's a tool to help us in our decision making by being able to process far larger sets of data than we could ever do and make predictions or decisions on the basis of that data. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Спасибо. Если вопросов к Майклу больше нет, то мы еще раз поблагодарим Майкла. Thank you so much.